Um, all right. Hi, everyone. I'm Xiang Hui. I'm very happy to be here to present our work on designing quality certificates. So first of all, I want to thank the conference organizer and also the review board, which I guess are the conference participants, all of you, for accepting our paper. So this is joint work with Jin at Maryland and Meng Liu from WUSTL. So to briefly motivate, quality certification is a common tool to enhance trust in markets with asymmetric information. There are many examples of quality certification in our day-to-day life, ranging from hygiene grade cards for restaurants, so that was Ginger's thing, and then there's Better Business Bureau accreditation and various badges on digital platforms like Airbnb's Superhost badge, eBay's top-rated seller badge. Now, the idea of quality certification is that some trusted third party can endorse firms whose underlying quality is above some threshold, right? Now, of course, the first order design question is how do we measure quality? And typically, quality is measured based on two types of informations. So it could be consumer reports. So these are like ratings and reviews, or it could be data on seller inputs. So this could be more supply side variables about what the seller did, like did the seller cancel a transaction or did the seller have the item scanned at the post office based on the tracking information. So going back to the Better Business Bureau accreditation example, the accreditation is based on both consumer complaints about the business, which is the source of consumer reports, as well as various business practices, right, which are supposedly more objective measures of what the firm does. So the key trade-off of using consumer reports versus seller inputs is this relevance versus controllability trade-off. In particular, if you use consumer reports, then that's going to make the certification more relevant for consumer experience. But these reviews and ratings could be depending on external factors that are not entirely within seller's control, right? So this could be factors like delivery person not properly handling the package or unforeseeable weather delays. So when these external factors are large, then the system that relies on consumer reports to measure seller performance is going to discourage seller effort, and that's going to ultimately hurt consumer experience. So this is a typical principal agent story. Now, on the other hand, if we use just variables on seller inputs, then the good side is that it's sort of more controllable by sellers, so they might feel more fair and more incentivized to exert effort. But on the other hand, this data only tracks a subset of inputs that are relevant for consumer experience. And in addition, we know that strong incentives in certain dimensions could cause gaming behavior of various sorts. So given the importance and ubiquity of quality certification, we think that it's sort of an important question to understand the consequences of using consumer reports versus seller inputs when we construct this quality certification. So that's what we do in the paper. And in this paper, we provide some empirical evidence on the trade-off of using consumer reports versus seller inputs. To do so, we focus on a major redesign of eBay's quality certification, which at a high level removed consumer rating from the construction of the quality certificates, but instead added more dimensions on seller inputs. We're going to study changes in seller efforts, consumer response, and market outcomes following the policy change. So one feature of the policy change is that it happened to all sellers on the entire platform at the same time. So that means that we do not have a clean control group that is completely unaffected by the policy change. So towards getting closer to a causal interpretation, our approach would be to explore heterogeneous changes across the many different subcategories on eBay that differ in this relevance and controllability of the new certificate in relation to the old. In a few slides, I will discuss in length how we construct or operationalize these two theoretical constructs. But conceptually, with relevance, we're trying to capture the alignment of a certification system with consumer experience. Whereas with controllability, there's more of a seller-side variable where we're trying to capture any variance in the certification status conditional on the given level of effort. Okay. So that's what the two constructs mean. Just to give you a preview of results, so recall that the policy change moves from a rating-based certification to a seller input-based certification, and we find that sellers, indeed improve in the dimensions that are highlighted by the new certification requirements. So this is what the policy was intended to do. In addition, we find that in low controllability markets, remember these are the markets where external factors are large, so that there's a large variation in consumer rating conditional on effort. So in these low controllability markets, we find that sellers are more likely to be automatically selected into certification, even without changing their behavior. And because of that, their improvement in behavior is actually smaller because of the binary nature of the certification and the fact that sellers are essentially strategically targeting their behavior at the threshold. So as marketers and economists, we might think that this result is intuitive, but the manager that I talked with at eBay was actually a little bit surprised by the results because eBay's original intent of making the policy change is to make the marketplace more fair for sellers. So the underlying assumption is that by doing so, sellers will sort of be more likely to exert effort. Of course, that intuition sort of misses the key gaming behavior, which is sellers could better target at the threshold, right? Okay, so on the seller side, we essentially find evidence, consistent with the rational buyer, which is that in a more relevant market, so these are the markets where the new system kind of aligns better with consumer experience. We find that in this high relevance market, consumers are more likely to buy from certified sellers, and they're more likely to return to the eBay and buy something else 6 months later. So lastly, we have some market-wide results. So first, we find a homogenization of share of certified sellers across market. So this is a result that eBay really liked because their idea is that having similar share of certified sellers across market is going to help consumers to better distinguish good versus bad sellers. And lastly, we have some suggestive evidence that sales are concentrated towards the big sellers in the slow controllability markets. So this result is a little bit surprising at first because you would think that uncertainty that comes from consumer ratings should for smaller sellers more given their small sample size. So essentially, a law of large number hasn't kicked in yet. But we think that this is driven by the institutional feature of how certification is designed on eBay, which is that certification is given at the seller level instead of the item level. So that means that sellers with more items to sell can potentially benefit more from this certification than smaller sellers, which we think explains the concentration towards these sellers results. Okay. So taken together, these results collectively suggest that when the market designer thinks about what information to use in quality certification, they should seriously think about these relevance versus controllability trade-off. And in addition, the design choice could have long-term implications on the marketplace, given this potential effect on market structure.
Could the sellers have learned the effects from a smaller scale test, or would this have to be a market-wide policy rollout?
Right. So this is more from a platform design perspective. Sure. Because if a seller so first of all, sellers signal is sort of subject to the platform signal infrastructure. So I'm not sure how exactly seller would experiment on that. But even if consumer could do that, that's sort of not the delivery effects which is what we're trying to capture. All right, background setting. We're looking at eBay. Believe it or not, it was actually the second most visited website in the world, right after Amazon. So it's by no means not relevant. It's actually quite large. So there's previous work that shows that quality certification on eBay actually matters a lot. In fact, this top-rated status is the only reputational signal that buyers could see on the search result page, which is at the very beginning of the search funnel. Right? So it's a very salient reputation signal. So what you're seeing is an example of the screenshots where some of the items have this badge, the others don't, and that might affect consumers' search decision. Once you click on one of the listings, that's going to lead you to the item page, and on the right panel of the item page, again at the top you see this top-rated badge. And if you look down, you also have some other reputation information like feedback score or percentage positive that the seller has received. So note that the policy change that we look at only affect what goes into this, what goes into this certification, but all the other informations are available on the website. So for buyers who are interested in figuring them out, they could still look for those things and know those information. Okay, what happens to the redesign? So this table lists the performance measures of the EGR certification both before and after. So you see that beforehand, most of the requirements are more based on consumer reports, such as negative rating, low detailed seller rating of item as described, buyer claims. So these are claims that buyers file privately to eBay, and low detailed seller ratings on shipping time. So these are all sort of consumer reports. Whereas afterwards, in this quality certification, we no longer have negative feedback and low detailed seller ratings. There's still buyer claims, but it counts as a misperformance against the seller only if it's unresolved by the seller. And the seller can always sort of resolve these claims by issuing a full refund to buyers. So definitely this third requirement is more controllable by sellers. Seller cancellation stays the same. And lastly, to measure shipping performance, instead of relying on consumer ratings on whether the item arrives on time, now eBay is using sort of more objective information based on the scan. All right, so now let me talk about the measurement of our two key theoretical constructs. So conceptually, relevance of a certificate captures its alignment with consumer experience. Now, we do not observe ground truth of consumer experience. So we have to make assumptions, and the assumption that we're making is that consumer ratings is the ground truth of consumer experience. Okay? So while there are many imperfections of consumer ratings, we think that this is the best measure that we have which is closest to consumer experience that's available to us and to the platform. So we're going to make that assumption. And we also make a simplifying assumption that the old system depends entirely on consumer ratings. This is just for the clarity of our argument. How do we measure alignment? Well, we measure alignment based on Pearson correlation. Okay, so essentially, alignment of the system with consumer experience is defined as the Pearson correlation of that system with the old system, which we assume to be the ground truth of consumer experience. Therefore, by definition, the relevance of old system is 1, and relevance of the new system is going to be captured by the correlation between the new badge and the old badge. So why do we see counterfactual here? Well, the counterfactual badges are obtained by applying the new requirements on seller on the policy announcement day, so that the seller doesn't have time to strategically respond to the new policy change yet. Yes?
If I'm recalling correctly, though, the old badge still had other inputs into it, right? That's not just the consumer experience. There's still some seller side inputs. So how does this follow?
Yeah. No, I'm just making a simplifying assumption. So it's okay that the old system relies on some seller inputs, but what's important is that the old system relies more on consumer ratings, and the new system relies more on seller inputs. Yes.
About the background of this policy change, maybe I missed it. Like, what is the reason that the platform decided to? It sounds like downgrade consumer feedback and put more weight. Is it like there was a lot of feedback which was not honest? Is that sellers were complaining? So can you give more?
Yes, it's a great point. Actually, I included a quote on eBay's policy page, and I forgot to mention it. So it says that first it says that these updates impact how seller standards are calculated, but they expect no significant change on the sellers. On the number of the sellers, our intention is to make eBay a more fair, consistent, and predictable marketplace where sellers are recognized for delivering great services. And then eBay, like on the policy change, also quoted, a few sellers where they say that, they're doing great, but then there's one or two random feedback that says that item was delivered late, and therefore they lost their ETRS badge. So eBay essentially wants to avoid those cases to make sellers more fair.
So just to make sure I understand, is it just that they don't aggregate this reviews some correctly and there is a lot of weight on this negative claims? Or it's more a problem like fake reviews or something? So what is the nature of it? So I guess my question is, why couldn't they take the information, still give it to buyers, but just aggregate it to kind of make it more fair and consistent?
So I mean, that also relates to an institutional feature on eBay, which is that sort of the median seller has a feedback of like 100%. So in some sense, it's not as informative as the value of reputation scores on other platforms. So that was a reason why they're sort of, yeah. Okay, quickly on the data. We used internal data from eBay, and we have rich information on listing characteristics, seller performance, certifications, and ratings. The policy was announced in September 2015 and was implemented in February 2016. So our sample essentially contains data from 11 months before the policy announcement and the 5 months in between announcement and implementation and 6 months after the implementation. So that's our data span. We look at the top eBay markets, which consists of majority of the sales, and we focus only the serious sellers with more than 5,000 active sales. So I actually somehow accidentally skipped the data slide before, but I don't know why that happened. But I'm so glad that Andre sort of asked me that. I'm trying to ask him two things. So that's relevance, right? So relevance is measured as the correlation between the new counterfactual batch. So again, it's important that the sellers hasn't responded to the policy change yet, because we don't want to capture the policy effects and use that to measure the characteristics of the market. So the correlation between new batch and the old batch. Now, in terms of controllability, theoretically, we wanted to capture the variance in certification status conditioned on seller effort. We do not observe seller effort. So we do not observe all dimensions of seller efforts. Right? So what we're going to do is to define effort based on the dimensions that eBay thinks are important, which are included in the new certification requirements. Okay, so essentially with this, we're assuming that eBay knows what are the important dimensions of efforts that lead to consumer happiness, and essentially we assume that the market's ordinal ranking of this controllability, based on our definition, is going to be positively correlated with the ranking if we were to observe all dimensions of effort. Okay, so that's the assumption that we're making. With that in mind, we define uncontrollable variation from seller's perspective. So essentially, in the old system, uncontrollable variation is going to be the conditional variances, variance of bad conditional good behavior for our definition, and variance of the good bad conditional bad behavior. So that's uncontrollable variation. In the old system, in the new system, this is just zero because seller can control everything. And controllability in the last step is just going to be the reverse of this uncontrollable variation. All right, so in this graph, each circle corresponds to a subcategory or a market on eBay, and the size of it corresponds to the market size. Okay? On the y-axis, we have relevance, which again is the correlation between the old batch and the new counterfactual batch. And on the horizontal axis, we have controllability, which is the reverse of the conditional variances. So the key takeaway from this graph is that while there's a correlation between relevance and controllability, which is about 2.24, they seem to be capturing different dimensions of the marketplace. So in the paper, we have a conceptual framework which is based on the confusion matrix of a two-binary certification system. And there we make a more formal theoretical argument why we need at least two dimensions of market heterogeneities in order to capture this policy change. Okay. So this graph helps us to visualize the data. Now, in terms of understanding what characteristics of the market is associated with market being relevant versus controllable. So each data point in this regression is a subcategory, and we are basically regressing the relevance of controllability of that market on the market characteristics, including average sales price, whether most of the products are standardized, package size is sort of a proxy for shipping cost, and then we also have some other controls like market concentration and total market size. So what we see is that for relevance, we have a positive coefficient in front of standardized. So that's sort of intuitive because we would think that in markets with more standardized products, consumers' idiosyncratic taste for products is small, and therefore there should be a larger, there should be a better alignment between consumer rating and objective information on seller inputs. We also have a positive coefficient in front of package size. So this is also intuitive because when the shipping cost is high, then you would expect that a larger delay in sellers handling the package would be more correlated with consumer feeling unhappy about it, right? Now in column 2, we see that controllability is negatively correlated with price in that category. So there's a paper by Luca and Rishabh that shows that high price is going to increase people's expectation about quality of the products, which then leads to more negative consumer feedback. So this negative coefficient is sort of in line with that argument. And we also see a negative coefficient in front of the package size. This is saying that when the package size is larger, then that probably will cause a larger variation in delivery time, which then would lead to a larger variation in consumer feedback on this delivery time. So, sorry, just 1 second. So I think that the fact that we are seeing that these coefficients are making sense by and large makes us feel more confident that the two measures that we are constructing intent, are capturing what we want them to capture. Yes.
What is the standardized?
Standardized, sorry, I should have defined it. So within each subcategory of eBay, different proportion of items have this finer catalog called product ID. So essentially, we rank all of the categories based on the share of products in it that has an eBay defined product ID, and we do above below median split based on this share.
So the reason I'm asking, don't you think relevance is more important when it's less standardized? Like, because then the reviews give you a fit of the product to what you're looking for.
Right. So relevance does not capture how important review is. It captures the correlation between review and seller and supply side variables. So this is saying that if it's standardized, then there's like less information in consumer reviews about user taste. Therefore, the correlation should be larger. So that's all right. So on this slide, I just want to give you some model-free evidence of what happened to sellers after the policy change. Okay? So you see 2 graphs. The one on the left corresponds to market with below median controllability. The graph on the right shows markets with above median controllability. Y-axis, share of ETR sellers. Horizontal axis, you have seller size. Okay? Then you have 3 lines in these graphs. The blue line corresponds to share of ETRS sellers under the old regime. The black curve is the new counterfactual curve. So this tells us the counterfactual share of ETRS sellers if we apply these new requirements on them right away without them changing behavior. And this green curve is the actual share of ETRS down the road when the policy has been implemented. Okay? So essentially, we're going to infer selection effect and behavior changes by looking at the difference between the lines. In particular, if we go from blue to black, then this gap captures selection effect, but the effect of automatically selecting sellers into certification. So first of all, it's negative, of course, in both markets because sellers were optimizing based on the old requirements, not the new one yet. And in addition, this drop is smaller in low controllability markets. In other words, the selection effect is relatively more positive in low controllability market. And that was essentially the problem that the eBay was trying to fix, which is that, if you look at the old curve, it seems like there's less EDR sellers in low controllability market. But if we apply the requirements that we think are important, there's actually more people who should be certified in this low controllability market, high controllability market, right? So that was eBay's thoughts. So that selection and behavior change can be captured by the gap between the black line and the green line. So what you see is that, first of all, there's an increase in behavior towards the new requirements, right? And that's why they weren't initially badged, but then they were badged when the policy was implemented. And the two green lines are kind of similar, suggesting that or indicating that the behavioral change is actually smaller in low controllability relative to high controllability markets. Right? So this is sort of a model-free evidence that summarizes what happens to seller after the policy change. Okay. Now on this slide, I want to provide you again with some model-free evidence that the smaller increase in low controllability markets in terms of seller behavior is at least partially driven by the threshold. So by the threshold effect. So what you're seeing in this graph are the two buckets of measures in the new certification requirements. And the two vertical lines corresponds to the policy announcement date and the policy implementation date, and the horizontal lines correspond to the thresholds. Okay, for the two metrics. We have 5 lines in each figure corresponds to sellers of different accent quality. So what you see clearly from this graph is that regardless of your seller group, you kind of have this convergence behavior towards the threshold right after the policy announcement date. Right? So this is the evidence, the graphical evidence that we have about the threshold effect. In the paper, we also do a more formal RDD analysis where we compare sellers who are very similar in quality, but some are just above the bar, some are just below the bar, and we see that people who are just below the bar are more likely to exert effort to get across the bar only in dimensions that they're lacking, but not in dimensions that they already met. So that's in the paper. We tried to look hard for evidence of multitasking, leverage the same RDB design by looking at whether we see more negative reviews or low detail seller rating or consumer complaints around the threshold. Unfortunately for us, we didn't find any gaming effect, but I guess that's good for eBay. So that's the results on seller. So I have 15 minutes.
Discussant, keep time.
Okay. Yes.
Have you shown defect and late delivery here? Do you find sellers changing their behavior on other dimensions?
That's a great point. So that's what I was trying to say with multitasking. Like we didn't. So there are dimensions which we can observe with eBay data and dimensions we don't. So we tried both. So you might think about some sellers might change their specified handling dates so that they can more easily fit into this new ETR's requirements. But we actually do not find that in the dimensions that we can observe. And for dimensions that we do not observe, we just look at consumer reports. Like our consumers are going to be more likely to sort of submit a claim for sellers who are just below the bar, who kind of put the effort on the dimension. And unfortunately, we don't have it. We wish that we have a richer story, but this is what we can detect in peer group. Yes.
In terms of their seller response, apart from late delivery, did you see them changing their posts, the types of products that they sell, the assortment, anything like that, to try to conform and avoid shipping products that are complicated or hard or defective?
So we didn't check the composition of products. We can check that, but what we checked is whether the specified handling date changes, and there's no change on that.
Specified what?
Handling date. So sellers specify how long it will take them to take their item to the postal office to get it scanned. So that's a decision variable that sellers make. So you would think that if there's changes in product type, then there might be changes on that date if your concern is about shipping, but we don't find evidence on that. But we haven't explicitly tested whether sellers.
Could it be that they just reduce customers' expectations by just increasing?
Exactly. So we don't find that. We don't find that, but we didn't test for changes in composition of products explicitly. All right, moving on to sellers. So here we want to understand changes in consumer valuation towards the new certification. So for this, we're going to leverage within seller by product, by listing date variation in the existence of this ETRS badge across different listings. So this variation exists because a seller on eBay with the ETR status still needs to offer fast shipping and return and accepts return in order to have this ETRS badge visible on the listings. Okay? So essentially, we're going to adopt this matched listing approach by first seen by Anab et al. And Alpha et al. Where we match listings based on who the seller is, the listing title, product ID, listing date of the item, and the listing price. Okay, so their argument, Anab et al.'s argument, is that this matched set essentially corresponds to seller experiments where sellers are exogenously changing sales parameters to test out demand. Okay, so that's the sort of exogenous variation that they were leveraging. The assumption is that condition on this matched set, the variation in batch spread with respect to the potential outcomes. In terms of regression, each observation is a listing. So we regress the 0, 1 sold dummy of item I or listing I in matched set J, whether that listing has a badge interacted with post, with the fixed effects, with the matched listing fixed effects. What do we find? Well, in the first column, we see that having this ETRS badge increases the probability of an item gets sold by 3.5 percentage points, and post the implementation of the policy change, that probability, that premium increases by 1.6 percentage points, which is about 46%. Now we should be very careful about interpreting this causally because we're just looking at one difference, but we're looking at certification premium over time. But what we think is more relevant here is comparing 2 versus 3, where we kind of have a difference in difference, where we compare not only changes in that premium before versus after, but we're also comparing across markets with low relevance versus market with high relevance. So the percentage change in the batch premium are 20% and 78% respectively. We did a test on the quality of the 2 percentage changes. We reject the null hypothesis that the percentage changes are the same. So essentially, this is saying that consumers value certification more in markets that have a higher relevance relative to markets with a below median relevance. So what are we doing here? So here we're trying to study the share of consumers who would return to the eBay platform to buy anything in 6 months down the road. So at a high level, this is a market level regression, and this is a DID specification where we're comparing before versus after. Then column 1, high relevance market versus low relevance market. So we find that consumers are slightly more likely to return back to the platform high relevance market versus low relevance market after the regime change. And if we include also how controllable the market is in the regression, that really doesn't change the result. Okay, so our intuition is that, sorry, 1 second, that relevance is more of a consumer side variable, whereas controllability is more of a seller side variable, which is why you control for it in the regression, it doesn't really change the results by much.
And you said your definition of relevance. Can you give me examples of categories that are high relevance, just so I can how to make an association? Like high relevance categories or what?
Yeah. So in markets where you have more standardized products.
So just give me an example, like
I don't know, like a cell phone. Like everybody agrees iPhone should be this good. So rating contains very, very little idiosyncratic taste compared to like seller, like whether sellers
tend to be high relevance.
Electronics and just books tend to be high relevance. Less standardized items are like arts, antiques, where even if seller handles stuff properly, they might misdescribe the condition of the item or how good the art is, stuff like that.
Okay, the policy for sort of like
Homogenization.
yeah, the branded commodities, things like that.
Yeah, and also shipping size is another thing. So basically, if you pay a lot for shipping, then 1 day delay in consumer in seller handling might make you more likely to be unhappy compared to if you just pay like $1 shipping. Okay, I covered that. So I think I have 10 minutes. Or it's either that or I'm over by 5 minutes. Then you guys are too kind to help.
Until 30, it's not until 35, 50 minutes. Would be
I thought it's 45 minutes.
45 or 50 minutes.
45 and 15, that was your change.
Good, so I'm not the only one that's confused. I feel good. Thanks, okay, so in terms of market level results, so here we just plot the distribution of share of certified sellers across different markets. So again, before the policy change under the old regime, factual share and the actual share after the policy change. So you see sort of changes in mean of the distribution, which is consistent with what we have seen before. But more importantly, what I want to show you is that you have this like thinner tails in this distribution, suggesting that you have more similar share of PR sellers across different markets. So again, I'm not advocating for this. This could be a good thing or bad thing depending on our policy goal. But eBay definitely likes this because they think that having roughly a similar number of share of DR sellers across different markets is going to help consumers to better interpret the signal or to better distinguish good versus bad sellers. That's that. So this is the sort of a complicated table that I wish that I have less column. Essentially, what we're trying to get at here is to think about the policy effect on total number of sales in that market, as well as market concentration. And at a high level, we're again doing some sort of difference in difference comparison. We're comparing before implementation versus after implementation, and we're comparing the 4 types of market depending on their relevance score above below median or control, and also controllability score above below median. So in this specification, our baseline is going to be low relevance and high controllability market, and that was chosen based on the hypothesized effect. In particular, our hypothesis is that this type of market should be affected most negatively, right? Because low relevance and high controllability. So the switch in that policy change doesn't really do any good for the market. So what do we find? So let's start with the first 2 columns. So basically, we do not find any statistically significant effect, right? So that's suggestive that essentially, these new dimensions that eBays are targeting are not too bad, right? They seem to be capturing important dimensions that lead to consumer happiness. Otherwise, we would see like a sales drop in markets where this new certification is less relevant. Now, moving on, column 3 to 5 are just different measures of sort of market concentration. So column 3 is number of sellers with sales. Column 4 is Herfindahl index. And then with column 5, we're looking at share of sellers or share of small sellers among all sellers that made a sale, and so forth. So let me just give you like one example here to help you better interpret this very messy table. So if you look at these 2 highlighted coefficients, okay? So both of the coefficients corresponds to high relevance market, but they differ in controllability. Okay? So what you can see from comparing the 2 coefficients is that in low controllability market, you actually have smaller share of small sellers who make sales relative to the high controllability market, right? So that's what we learned from comparing these 2 coefficients. And the similar finding can be found if you look at the coefficient above. This also shows that compared to the baseline, right, which is low relevance, high controllability, in low controllability market, you have a smaller share of small sellers that makes a sale. And you can sort of do the same comparison across different columns. So overall, we get the consistent result that essentially, if you look at markets with low controllability, sales seems to be more concentrated towards bigger sellers rather than smaller sellers. And again, we think that this is because of eBay's particular institution details, which is that the certification is given at the seller level, which benefits all of the sellers' listings, as opposed to certification given at the item level. All right, I think I'm on time. Just to conclude, in this paper, we try to understand the consequences of using consumer reports versus supply set variables to construct quality certification. So our key results are that the new regime, which is based on supply set variables, gives seller more control and therefore motivates their effort, but it also allows them to do like some gaming behaviors, in particular targeting their effort at the threshold. Our second result is about seller, well, consumer side, which basically says that consumers are rational. They markets where this new metrics is more relevant. They like it more likely to purchase from certified sellers, and they're more likely to come back in the future. And lastly, we have some suggestive evidence that in markets with lower controllability, sales seems to be more concentrated towards big sellers. So taking all this together, our result indicates that market designers, they need to really think about this relevance and controllability trade-off when they design this quality certification. And the exact results is very nuanced. In particular, changes in market concentration, for example, actually depends on the specific institution detail. It depends on the interaction of the rules of your certification interacted with what data that you use, right? So it's a very nuanced design choice. All right, that's all I have for today's talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right. I would just like to start by thanking the organizers for having me here. It's a pleasure. It's a great pleasure to read this paper and learn from it. Xiang did a great job presenting it, so I'm not going to go again into the details. I just want to give like a little bit of an overview to start, and then some thoughts that came up. So I want to start with a quote from the man himself, founder of eBay, who says something that we probably already knew, to be honest, which is trust is everything on eBay. When eBay started, a lot of people were making fun of the concept. Are you telling us that I have to send a check, across the country or across the globe, and maybe I'll get a package one day, maybe not, and it would seem like a very strange concept. And of course, the answer is yes. You're sending that check now. Obviously, it's digital, but you do it because you trust that the reputation system matters enough that the seller has incentives to behave properly. Okay, so just want to start by giving you an example. I was in the market, coming here, I was in the market for a vintage UCSD jacket. So I looked on eBay, which is probably the best place for something like that. And you see, this is the classic eBay listing. This is a seller that did not receive the distinction, so it's not a top seller. If you click on the seller name, of course, you can find out more about them. And you see, this is a seller that's highly successful and extremely highly rated. So 99.9 positive feedback, 44,000 items sold. Even if you go with the more detailed measures, it's I put description 5 out of 5, description 5 out of 5. So it's kind of a result of these changes Xiang has described very well. Is you see sellers like this who are doing extremely well. They're consumers clearly love them and buy from them constantly and rate them very highly. Don't get the badge. And of course, the opposite is also true. So Xiang mentioned it already. eBay is a little like Uber. It's one of those marketplaces where reputation has gotten so inflated that 94% is a really bad score on eBay, just like 4.6 is a really bad score on Uber. So this is a consumer. This is an eBay community. Is a consumer getting confused. They say, how come that a seller with 94.1, which is really bad, is considered a top-rated seller? Like this doesn't make a lot of sense. And again, this is a result of the fact that these two measures have been decoupled, and so you find examples of both. Okay. Just to kind of verify, obviously the whole paper is about eBay. This is something, badges and quality certificates are, of course, they're everywhere. Basically, every platform you think of, you're going to find them. This is Uber. This is for drivers, and having kind of quality certificates on Uber translates into financial benefits for drivers, better matching, better riders, everything, you name it. So it's super important. Perhaps one of the most well-known kind of distinctions or quality badges is the superhost on Airbnb, which has big effects on pricing and how often you can fill your apartment. And then of course I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Amazon here. Amazon does it a little bit different. As far as I could tell, I couldn't find like a specific seller badge on Amazon, but of course you find a lot of kind of products badge. So the best seller one, you've seen this before, so you're not, this is not the first time. It's usually referred as the product badge. So you find something like this, Amazon choice, and so on and so forth. And then of course, just to kind of close the circle here, you get badges for sellers, you get badges at the product level, and you got badges for consumers. Like if you want to create trust on the platform, like a big part of that is also kind of emphasizing that some opinions are, coming from knowledgeable sources. So this is Yelp with the Elite Squad, Amazon as top reviewers, IMDb as top 1,000 reviewers, and so on and so forth, right? So this kind of quality certification is, very, very prevalent in two-sided markets, and again, it affects sellers, buyers, and products and themselves. So not surprisingly, this stuff matters, right? It's been shown that it has causal impact on sales. I'm not gonna discuss that too much because I think it's something that we've known for a while. The question is how you design it. You can take two routes. The first route you can take is, at the end of the day, we have reputation systems for sellers to benefit consumers. So we just let consumers tell us, right? Like tell us which sellers you like, you rate products constantly, and we just use reviews for that. The other view is, that there's plenty of reasons to not trust consumer reviews. I'm going to highlight a few later. So maybe let's adopt unobjective metrics, right? If the seller is shipping something that's as described and is shipping it on time, then why would we kind of want to give weight to a negative? Now, to be clear, reviews haven't gone anywhere. Like if you open it, as I showed you earlier, like reviews are still there. It's just that this badge is becoming more decoupled from reviews. So what the authors do, they study this policy change on eBay in 2015. And it's a rich paper. There's a lot of results. There's a lot, going on. So as I said, I'm just gonna try and be selective here. So the first question is how the two differ from each other. Was it good for sellers and for which sellers? Of course, we care about the distributional effect as well, consumers and eBay as well. I'm gonna try and conjecture a little bit over there. So the main findings. So the sellers respond rationally, which again is unsurprising for us. We are saying it was surprising for some eBay executives, but they exert greater effort in the measured dimension. So if, promptly shipping is one of those, then of course they're going to start doing that, and maybe they're going to neglect other stuff. And they target the threshold quite accurately. So for consumers, they care more about certification when relevant, and they return more often as well. So it's good for retention. eBay becomes more concentrated. Again, we can talk about whether this is good or bad. If you're eBay, do you want to give more weight to the already famous sellers, or do you want kind of the long tail of sellers to grow even longer? We could argue for both. The share of certificates become more homogeneous, more uniform across categories, which, I guess this is pretty clearly something that eBay wanted. So this is seen as a positive, okay? Again, the key trade-off here is one between controllability and relevance. So the new metric is more controllable because it's objective measures, so you can do what's needed, but it could be less relevant to consumers. So some pluses and minuses here. It incentivizes greater efforts. If you go back to kind of, contract theory 101, the effort that you put in is going to be kind of decreasing in the variance of output and effort. Like if output is completely random, at some point you just give up. If output really reflects your effort very closely, then of course you work harder. So these reflect effort more closely, so they work harder. It is also less redundant. I think this is an important point. Reviews are still there. So to have reviews and then something else that's reflective of reviews, in some sense, you're sending two signals that are very, very highly correlated. It is also unbiased. I put this in quotes, but what I want to say here is it at least doesn't have biases that we know online reviews used to have. And here I'm just citing a few, and these have been documented on eBay before. Racial biases, rating inflation, the Socratic face, I don't know if you want to call it a bias, but certainly can be behind biases. Reciprocity motives, like it's well known that on eBay, a lot of the reviews happen, like, hey, you give me a 5, I give you a 5, and we just proceed, with that. So there's many problems. The minuses, it might reward dimensions that consumers don't really care about, and it might only incentivize sellers up to a point. And we see that it does only incentivize sellers up to a point. They get to the threshold and then they stop, right? So obviously this is a theoretical ambiguity, so the authors try to answer this empirically. Okay, I have 3 or 4 comments on this. The first one is, this is really the key trade-off, so I want to expand on it a little bit more. And it's the trade-off between relevance and controllability. So when is it that reviews are not controllable, right? If you're a seller, you ship something on eBay, when is it that, what can go wrong, right? There's 2 examples in the paper. I like both. One is damaged packages, right? You can't control the whole shipping process. The other one is weather. Of course, these 2 are related. We can also talk, we can also think about taste mismatches. Maybe you just get unlucky and you get an abnormally tough reviewer. That happens, right? So all of this stuff is what makes reviews less controllable from the point of view of sellers. The question I want to ask here, in this case, are they relevant? Obviously, I'm using relevant in a way that's slightly different. It's different enough from the way it is in the paper, but is this relevant for future consumers? Because each of the above seems to be cases where it's slightly idiosyncratic, and for future consumers, it might not be that informative. Like if you're receiving a package and the package gets broken during delivery, yeah, it's unfortunate. As a future consumer, 2 years later, I might not necessarily care. It might not be informative of my experience. Okay, so it's kind of tricky for me to think of situations where reviews are highly relevant for future consumers, but at the same time, they're mostly out of sellers' control, right? Like it's. I tried. Like you can think of stuff, but it's at least for me it was difficult. All right. The second thing I want to talk about is this issue of kind of low correlation, right? And the question is, do you like low correlation or do you want high correlation? So there's a beautiful paper from almost a decade ago at this point by Bart DeLange and co-authors where they show that kind of online consumer reviews are very poorly correlated with external measures of quality, and they say that this is likely to be an issue. And then there's a response to that article in the same issue of JCR by Winner and Fader that say, number one, is this surprising in any way? And number two, is this a bad thing, right? If you have two sources of information, then the fact that they're uncorrelated might not be a bad thing. So here, low correlation might come from, might come from the fact that the new metric is not important for consumers. Might also come from the fact that it just mentioned things that reviews don't mention, but are still important, right? So I was asking Sharbasti before the talk on Goodreads. I remember at some point, I was looking at data on Goodreads, like 1 million reviews, not a single one mentioned price. Nobody talks about price, which makes sense. You're reviewing a book, you don't say like, hey, it costs $26. You just talk about the pros, right? So, but price is still important. It's still an input. Reviews don't talk about it, but it's still something that you would guess future consumers would care about to some extent. And again, here, in some sense, you don't really have a choice. You can have both. So I can see that a seller has 99.9 and doesn't have a badge. I can see that a seller has 94 and has a badge. So you kind of see both. So in this sense, low correlation becomes, less of a problem and in principle even desirable. All right. One more thing on reputation on good news versus bad news. So this paper made me think of a much older paper it's a theory paper that came out in Econometrica a decade ago. That was basically saying, the way that sellers, I'm going to give more general examples, but the way that people react to reputational incentives depend on the way the reputation is shared. It depends on whether reputation comes from good news or from bad news. So an example of good news is academics, right? We learn about people, with good news. Oh, you won additional award. Oh, you got another publication. So this is a situation where reputation evolves to a system of everything to gain, which gives greater incentives to people with low reputation. The opposite, of course, is a bad news system. The classic example here is surgeons, where it's things are expected to go well, and then if something goes wrong, then your reputation goes down. And this is a system where there's everything to lose, right? So the greatest incentives come to those sellers, to those agents with high reputation. Okay, so here the median average review is 99%, and only a minority of sellers are certified with this. So in some sense, once you start making this more decoupled from reviews and more important for sellers, you're moving from a system that's essentially a bad news system, right? Because everyone is at 99 and then you get a bad review and this is a giant bad news, towards a system where you're not expected to have something. So the prior is lower, but then you can get this positive shock. So it's a completely different signal structure. I think the interesting thing here is what does it do for the distribution of sellers' efforts? Like, is it true that consistent with the model, like the good ones become great, but the ones that are not so good completely give up? Do they exit? Do we see kind of larger spreads in quality, in sales? In principle, like there could be a lot here. Right. Another thing is kind of, that there's clear evidence that sellers are gaining the system when it comes to the threshold and stuff like that. So this is undesirable, of course. You don't want them to give up once they reach that. The only thing I want to highlight here is that reviews are also prone to other forms of gaming. Now, of course, the most obvious one that comes to mind is fake reviews, and that's the most problematic. But there's a bunch of those, and now we've seen papers coming out describing how sellers respond to the presence of reviews. Could be pricing strategies, could be kind of quid pro quo. Again, very common on eBay. Hey, you give me a 5, I give you a 5, and we move on. Maybe you're targeting certain buyers that are more likely to give you a positive review. So there's other forms of gaming that come, even though you have less control over reviews. You can still do something. So is it obvious that this type of gaming is more desirable than the type of gaming that's induced by these by the threshold itself? All right, some quotes to end. The first one that's of interest to me would be to see, first of all, how aware are consumers of this change? We know that some of them are aware, but of course, extremely self-selected sample. Those are the people that are, blogging on the eBay community. So these are obsessed with the website. The question is, on average, how aware are they? Do they change their review style because they say like, hey, this badge now is completely separate, so I'm just going to emphasize other stuff? Or maybe there's almost like an adverse selection problem where you get recognized and now consumers can how to get you. It could change the decision whether to review and the type of review that you write as well. The second one, I had already discussed this, is this issue of increased concentration. Is it because larger sellers are better at gaming the system? Are they more motivated because they're professionals? Obviously, they have higher stakes. Do they, is it a minimum ratings kind of requirement type thing? And again, if you're eBay, is this good news or is it bad news? Do you want to emphasize, giant sellers with 50,000 products, or do you want kind of the long tail to grow and grow? Yeah, the last one, again, short item, but it's just entry and exit. Like do we see sellers that now they know that they have no chance to get to the badge, and they say, you know what, there's all these people with a badge. I was already at a disadvantage. Now it's getting tougher. I might kind of opt out. This kind of has a flavor of, for those of you that know, is Nikhil Bellotti paper on barriers to entry and how having agents with high reputation obviously crowds out others as well. All right, I'm done. It's an excellent paper. There's a lot of food for thought. There's a lot of results as well. I really enjoyed the reading, and thank you so much for letting me discuss once again. Thank you.